Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let's give folks some time. I see the count pumping up, and then we'll kick off. I always think of this over moment, and we should be playing elevator music or something, right, Glenn? What do you think?
Yeah, I could whistle, come up with a tune and just keep everyone entertained while we wait.
Wow, if we have hosts that besides finance and FP&A know how to whistle and make it like that.
Actually,
What a bonus.
I've been accused of being tone deaf before, so if I started whistling, we might send people out.
Okay. No, let's try to keep them in. Good. Well, let's kick off with some of the intros while people continue joining. Hello, everyone. I'm your host. I'm Julio Martínez. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Abacum, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you. I'm incredibly excited to be sharing the stage today with Glenn Hopper, who is now the head of AI research and development at the Ventus Advisory Group. But he's also a well-known best-selling author and contributor in the finance FP&A community. And he's been known for his work focused at the intersection between artificial intelligence and corporate finance, which is, of course, an extremely promising field. Glenn, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Really excited to be here. And, this is showing how nerdy I am, but I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but this is one of my favorite topics, so I can't wait to dive in today.
Yeah, no, can't wait to hear your thoughts, and bring your expertise to the audience. This session will be, for context to everyone, about 45 minutes long, and we'll be talking about how to start very strongly the next annual planning season, right? It's coming, it's around the corner. What can we do now to start planning to succeed in a couple of months down the line? That will include how to leverage your second half of the year reforecast, getting into 2025. Actually, also Glenn is prepared to share flexible models to anchor your process around. And some of the budgeting approaches and tools that can help you succeed. So it will be very actionable and full of pragmatic tips and best practices to guide you through the next budgeting cycle. Before we kick off more formally with these amazing questions that we prepare for Glenn, all these will be then followed by an audience Q&A. So please keep your questions coming throughout. I will be monitoring the chat, the Q&A panel, so don't be shy. This is your conversation as well. This is your webinar as well. So please bombard Glenn and I with your questions. Let's warm things up a little bit now with a poll question, and then once a few people more continue joining, and let's get warm up. Can you complete the following one? Let's see, budgeting season is, what is the budgeting season for you?
Why is one of the options not the best time of the year?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question, Glenn. I suspect, long nights and coffee overdose might not be.
All right, fair enough. Yeah.
Might not be, yeah. Yeah. Man, heck, who knows? Maybe for some people, it's just this party, Good. Awesome. Hey, budgeting season it's our Super Bowl, right? It's our Super Bowl. It's peak season. It's finance team's Super Bowl, but it's also full of pressure, full of deadlines, and full of, things that we need to accomplish. So, but let's kick off, and then we'll get the responses in a second. Look, an initial question that I have for you, Glenn, is, right now, finance teams are likely kicking off their second half of the year reforecast, right? Some people might do this quarterly, monthly, but overall, this is an inflection point in the year where you actually probably revisit a bit more deeply, the second half of the year and how you track it versus end of the year goals. So for those folks out there that have not been reforecasting monthly or on a regular, even rolling basis, this H2 24 reforecast can be very overwhelming. What strategies have you used in the past to streamline this process?
Yeah, so a couple ways to think about this, and I apologize, I'm having a technical glitch here. Let's see if we can get. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So I go back to I've been doing FP&A for a long time, and I go back to the early days where everything was done in Excel, and it was just a matter of you're queuing up your spreadsheets and getting all your templates ready and everything. But you know, that's the old days, and hopefully most people aren't still trying to do all this in Excel. I mean, it's untenable with the amount of data that we're working with now. So I think a big thing is for people who are using um, automated FP&A software, thinking of more centralized data than we had in the past in ways that we can speed up consolidation. But now is the time to start looking at what we have, getting everything, kind of getting our ducks in a row for the second half forecast. And we can. I know we don't want to go too far in it, but I can't help myself. There are a lot more AI powered tools, and I don't mean just generative AI. I mean forecasting tools with machine learning and sort of traditional AI. That's something that a fortunate few who have big enough teams are able to use. But I think that's going to be coming more and more for people as software companies start integrating that kind of stuff into the platforms. But I guess that's the two technology answers. But really, if you haven't already, the easiest way to keep rolling through your forecast is to do an actual 12-month rolling forecast model. And this is just, it's, in addition to looking at your results every month and looking at where you are to budget, fine tuning and the budget as you go. And then you're not starting over from new. If you're reassessing and reevaluating and looking at your targets and looking at your performance to target and understanding what levers, what's driving where you are now, really that 12-month rolling forecast, it's just a routine and a cadence. And if you're doing that, then you're not scrambling to do this second half forecast. Now, I know, that sort of rolling forecast may not be as broadly distributed. It may not be as crucial, but if you're doing it, you're more prepared for that second half. And the other one is, I think a lot about, we've got our trends that we're tracking out, and we want to do what the model shows and sort of continue the regression out. But I also think that having key drivers set up for the budget so that you can tweak the drivers as you go, whether it's, inflation rate or any kind of external kind of macroeconomic level, or things that are happening internally, things that where you can tweak a driver and it rolls through the model so that you're not reinventing the model in the middle of the year.
Glenn, this is great. Thank you so much. Great takeaway. Maybe an opportunity to start thinking about rolling forecasting, or at least monthly forecasting, as we get into the second half of the year or even the next annual budgeting season. And then effectively thinking of streamlining your processes through technology, right? Which is obviously an accelerator and a time saver, huge time saver. Awesome. Well, of course, we know that stakeholder buy-in is crucial for an accurate forecast, and the value of the forecast and potentially the budget and the forecast is in having that distributed, as you said. What should finance teams be doing now, or maybe even more generally the whole year, to break down those silos? Any quick wins before the annual budgeting process starts?
Yeah, and this is going to sound cliche, but the simplest way that I can say this is you want to make sure, not just in budget season, but year round, that everybody's singing from the same sheet of music. And what I mean by that, I really for years, when I come in, whether I'm a new CFO starting at a company, or if I'm coming in doing consulting, the first thing I want to do is kind of come up with a data lexicon and make sure everybody understands the KPIs, because the KPIs and the targets and the goals all roll in with budgeting. And if you have an environment in place in your company where we know what our goals are, we know how we're measuring them, we all know the definition of the goals, we've sort of identified what these levers are that are going to drive our budget results, then it just becomes part of your monthly communication. Is we're going to meet, we're going to have cross-functional meetings, we're going to talk about our KPIs and targets, We're going to have real-time input and transparency on our data. Everybody understands what we're looking at. And I think that this kind of open meeting that you're having during the year, it helps build, think of a more of a collaborative environment. And you want to have a platform that you can use as well for that real-time input, where you're looking at what you've done historically. Everybody understands, hey, we're exceeding our goals, or we have to do something to try to hit our goals. And then if you just have this formal process year round, it makes all this budgeting so much easier. So on the, that's sort of, I really can't stress enough, for me, the best environments I've had where budgeting season is not a crisis every year is when it's just part of the cadence and the communication in the company. But as far as the quick wins go, kind of continuing on that previous idea, I think kick it off to everybody, let them know, hey, we're about to start budgeting season. These are our goals. These are our expectations, and make it easy for the non-finance people, for the department heads to be able to provide their information, so simplified templates and whatever format you're using, and just continuing on with that ongoing communication and making it easy for the team to make their inputs.
Yeah. That's a key concept, right? When we think of breaking those silos and getting into business partnering, and love how you think of getting behind your desk and just go talk to the business and make it easy for them to give you the information you need. And maybe you can set up workflow approvals for different budget requests, or you can set up collaborative workflows for people to then very easily engage in that process, so that it's orchestrated. Of course, it can be very manual sometimes, but there are options out there to streamline that and multiply the impact. I think that is a good sideway into finance getting closer to the business. Probably it starts with the CEO. So a question I have, Glenn, for you is: we know budgeting can't happen in the vacuum, and it both drives, but it's also driven by the overall business strategy, right? I think of budgeting as the business operational plan. Right, so we should delete this concept of budgeting. It's just, a good budget is the operational plan that is going to govern execution in the company. So what are some of the strategic objectives that the CFO and CEO need to agree on before the budgeting can begin?
Yeah, and I think knowing that the budget is, and our performance to the budget, that's going to be our scorecard for the year. So you can't create a budget in a vacuum. I mean, we'd love to be building cool models where all we did was, take our trends and seasonalize and, forecast them out using cool forecasting methods and all that, and sort of creating these budgets that are just model driven and just on the numbers. But that's not the way the real world works. So when we are putting together the budget, it's not just forecasting out the trends. We look at everything. I mean, objectives, targets, strategy, initiatives. We have to push all these into the budget, and we know, okay, our compound annual growth rate for the last 3 years has been 10.6%, but we have more aggressive goals this year. How are we going to drive those and everything? So I think you know the trend, where you are, you have your aggressive sales goals. So you start top line with revenue growth rate and market share objectives, and how does that translate into the budget? And also there may be, what are we going to do to increase profitability margins and find ways to reduce our costs? What are these targets? So, we know the trend is here, but if we're being asked to squeeze a little bit, we need to align on those. And, our headcount and talent acquisition strategies, we need to think those in, because if we're going to be adding 200 heads in the third quarter, we need to be sure and budget for that. And then, of course, capital expenditure that we don't think of that, in the normal trend of the ongoing operating expenses. So we need to plan for those. And it's really just, it is translating that business plan into the numbers and something that we can measure by.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. And that connects very neatly with the top-down approach that maybe the CFO and CEO, probably together with the board, cook in the kitchen, right? And on their own. But also there is this very clear reality of any business, right? With different budget owners, department heads, CXOs, VPs, right? They have a reality and they live in the more real world. So how does this top-down approach and this CEO, CFO dictating some guardrails, how those guardrails inform the bottom-up budgeting process?
Yeah, it's so I think back to the first departmental budget I had was when I was in the military years ago, and there was a mentality in that era in the military where you better spend all your budget or you're not going to get it next year. So I just even that was before I was in finance, and even back then that seemed absurd. It seemed that it was driving all the wrong things, and since then, as I've moved over onto the finance side, I take a very different approach to it. But the top down and the bottom up both have their places, and I think we have to start with what are our goals from that sort of top down level. We know what we want to do performance wise as a business, so we start at one level with the budgeting there, and we may look and say, okay, looking at each department, these are the budget ceilings based on our overall goals, and then we define our KPIs and how we're going to measure it. And then, when we get down into that, into the departmental level and we start looking maybe at more discretionary expenses and everything, there is a place for zero-based bottom-up kind of budgeting. And then, the great thing is, again, going back to that collaboration and real-time visibility into data, if you have this environment where people understand what's going on and they know what the objectives are, they know what the goals are, and they understand your budget may be getting cut a little bit in this area, but you have more room in this. It all works together for the process. So having those guardrails though around sort of department level and what's discretionary and all that, and then the magic happens in the middle.
Exactly. So the magic, as you said, happens in the middle, and very fun when I think of the conversations that happen when bottom up and top down clash. And probably this is the beauty of leveraging both systems. But I wanted to pick your brain because obviously in FP&A there are different parties, and then some people favor more top down, some others favor more bottom up. Zero-based budgeting, which I find amazing, but obviously, hey, more expensive, more cumbersome. So yeah, how do you think of those? Do you take sides and have a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, really, because I think I'm just a geek for models in general. I mean, my favorite way to start the budgeting process is to just take the trends and put in the new drivers that I have, whether it's inflation rates or interest rates or whatever is going to macro stuff, and then internal stuff where we're bringing on 8% more sales headcount, and that's going to drive revenue by this. So I like to start with some basic modeling, and I do this sort of within FP&A in the CFO's office. I do this to start with, let's level set here and say, all things being equal, if the business continued and we were sort of in this perfect world where just the inertia and momentum were just going to carry us exactly like we were, where would we be? So then you take that and you look at the top down of, okay, that's fine, but we've got these, we've raised money, or we're, whatever's going on, we have more aggressive goals. So then how are we going to do that? So, I start with that model, start looking at what the goals are, how you're going to achieve, what are the key things that we're going to try to hit at whichever area of the budget. And then let's just start layering those in. And when you layer those in, I think about what we plug in as drivers to the model. Those should actually be the levers that if you impact these drivers, it's going to change something down the line. So, you see, okay, all things being equal, this is where we're going to be. But if we change this, if we add that 8% more headcount, or if we reduce cost by this much in this department or whatever, the kind of things that we can see to get our results. So you have the top down as in this is what we really want to hit. And then from the bottom up, you're trying to figure out how can we do this where we minimize costs but have the tools that we need, and then again trying to meet in the middle to find that perfect budget.
Meet in the middle. I love it. I know you are an expert modeler and you're very fond of, building flexibility. And my next question is related to that. How can finance teams build flexible models to anchor their budgeting process around? Which is not easy, right? It's easier said than done.
Yeah, it is much easier these days than it was back in the Excel days. So, where you can run out some different ones. And I am a huge proponent of scenario-based models. And, you sort of have your best case scenario, mid case, worst case scenario. But then when you use that driver-based modeling, you say, well, what if, you can't predict for black swan events, but you might say things like, well, here's market risk, here's credit risk, here's interest rate risk, or whatever. And then just say, well, what if we flipped every single switch to, emergency category? What's the worst case that would happen with our business? And then on the flip side of that, see where, best case would be, and then keep playing with those dials so that you sort of have, okay, this is our plan A. But and the other cliche that I always think of in budgeting is that Mike Tyson quote that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And really, the scenario analysis is, well, what happens if we get punched in the mouth? What if there is, a global pandemic or a supply chain crisis, or, the 08, 09 kind of crash? How exposed are we to that? So, looking at the sensitivity analysis and understand, what if there's a supply chain disruption, or what if our cost of goods sold skyrockets this year? How can we weather that? What would we have to do in that? And I think if you incorporate that sensitivity analysis in, and then you sort of understand where your potential weak points are and where your strengths are, and then so you understand the impact of those key variables. And then if you have these kind of modular budgeting structures with all those scenarios where you can make tweaks and adjustments to it. And then this is why, you make your plan for 12 months, but then you have to be flexible through the year. So you kind of have this modular, and something unexpected happened first quarter, and you say, oh, this is like scenario 23 where we did this. And then you just use those rolling forecasts to continuously update the projections. But it is, it would be great if we could have a crystal ball and just know exactly how the year is going to go. But that's not the reality. And I think of, there's that quote by George Box, the statistician, that is, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I feel like if we build all these models, as many as, of all the scenarios we can think of, that maybe our main model didn't work, but we then go back to, here's this other model that we did. This is useful because it showed us what would happen if we went off the rails this way. So,
yeah, I love that quote. Thank you so much for sharing. And scenario planning is, I just feel, a must before getting into a good budgeting season or building your operational plan. And you're totally right. And look, it's close to impossible to accurately model reality. Like, there is not such a thing, right? So like we need to keep our ambitions in check. But it's way more about the thinking process. It is more about socializing those with key stakeholders in the company, fine-tuning your drivers, like making people reflect about the business and what the business might encounter in the following year. So the magic, again, is in the middle, not in the scenario or the model itself, but actually, what you need to think and reflect and share with people to get to that scenario. So yeah, and then my second consideration is, yeah, in spreadsheets, it used to be way harder. Like today, technology, of course, makes that way easier, right? And we call it one-click scenarios, which might be a couple, but probably not more. So things are getting easier for us in finance. But I think I have now a tactical question for you. Going from a scenario planning, which is amazing, and related to that, sometimes what if analysis, which of course are different things, but also very helpful. But we are talking a lot about business partnering, engaging business heads, and a reality that I encountered many times. It was as simple as not getting the data that I need, and getting that data and that input delayed, or it's inaccurate or incomplete, or just whatever, the data doesn't make sense. They don't fill the template. There is no template, like whatever. So that is very frustrating because finance teams are operating under very tight deadlines. So how can we in finance better engage with stakeholders to provide the data we need clean on time?
Yeah, and this is, I mean, we've been talking about digital transformation for 30 years, and I've never been at a company where I feel like we all need to get gold stars that say we've done it, we win. It's just, and that's why it's funny. I keep thinking of, when you say digital transformation, and we really have been talking about this for the 30 years that I've been in the business world, and if you say transformation, it feels like we transform and then we're done, and I don't like that because it's really more of a digital evolution. It's ongoing. It's continuous improvement. We're going to always work to get better. And what we, the reason I lead off with that is because we have these ideas of being able to have, again, the one of the promises of digital transformation was the democratization of data, where there's no more information silos. We all get access to the data we need, and different companies are at different places with that. And I do think that, even though none of us maybe are completely satisfied with where we are, we have, across the board, just because of software providers that are out there that are making it easier, and then the work we've done and the realization of the importance of the data, the software out there has gotten better for this, but where it's not putting everything into a spreadsheet and emailing it around like we did in the old days. It's now we do have collaborative software platforms where people can go in and track data, and some's real time, maybe some's based on the month end close, but we're all, again, we have our data lexicon, we're that same sheet of music, we're all looking at the same data, and I think now, regardless of the system you're using, if you have these standardized user-friendly templates with clear instructions where everybody knows where the data is coming from, and when you ask for something, here is specifically what I'm talking about that I want, and you don't have to redefine it every year, because again, we have that environment and that atmosphere where we all understand, and when we define the KPIs, we're all using the same thing. And again, FP&A software these days can really help with this automated data collection. So it's a lot of times now stuff we used to have to ask for is just built into the system and you already have it. But I do think because we live in this world, we forget that for other people, when we're bringing them into budget season, this is not their primary focus. So I think even if you've been at the same company for years and it's the same department heads that you're working with, let's have a touch base. Let's have a pre-submission training thing where everybody understands this is what I need from you. This is what I mean. Any questions, have all the department heads in to talk about it. And I think it's also equally important. We're wanting information from them, but we need to be sure that we're on the other side sharing all the information they need to make an informed decision. So this is their historical data, their GL, whatever it is that is going to help them for the budget. We need to be sure that we're providing that to them timely and that it's accurate. And again, it's just, I think so much about how far we've come with automated FP&A software these days, and makes this data collection and transfer of data between departments so much easier than it used to be.
Cool. Thank you for sharing, and I think it's a great topic because we in finance, and when I was in the transit, I didn't feel it was my job to actually chase people to do their part, right? So I felt a bit like, I don't want to be these angry people chasing people to get like the numbers. They actually owe me because this is not me actually. This is the company mandate. Like we need this operational plan in functioning, right? And it's coming from the CEO and it's coming from up there and whatever, right? So why aren't they doing their part? But then you find yourself short of levers. Then I started to realize, the importance of, business partnering in general, and, getting closer to the business in order to, it's a give and get and those things. But also I realized that the art of budgeting is just more than numbers, right? It's also about the partnership and understanding the business and adding value throughout the year to have an effective budgeting season. And it also requires very strong, effective project management. And this is it, right? It's the reality of it, and building this collaboration into the process. Ultimately, it's a process. So what can finance teams do to drive stakeholder collaboration and alignment when it comes to the budgeting season, or reforecasting, all those collaborative processes?
Yeah, and I got to say, I love now that everybody talks about business partnering, because when I started in the field, that wasn't a phrase that we threw around, and it was, I think about the first team, my first senior finance leadership role, when I had the companies. This is around year 2000 or so, but where I had the company's first BI team rolled in under FP&A, and people didn't understand what we were doing, and they were worried that we were poking around in their business. And it was the two teams that they hated the most were the BI team and the project management team, because they were like, why you guys are coming in and and messing with what we do. So but looking at, in the last almost 25 years since then, this whole business partnering idea, it's really caught on, not just in finance, but on, you see data science teams where you have embedded data scientists in each groups. And I think people are understanding now, after years and years and going through the digital transformations that we've been through, that by having these cross-functional business partnering, interdepartmental, that we are able to tear down those silos. And I think when you have the right environment with that, where there is sharing of data between departments, where we are all using the same KPIs and metrics, and we all understand what we're doing, then that environment, you have clear accountability for everybody, not just for what they're forecasting, but for their performance to what they said they were going to do last year. So you get this accountability, and then you put kind of milestone checkpoints through the process while we're going through the annual budgeting or the reforecast or whatever it is, and then just continuing to have these cross-functional budget review meetings, so that it's almost, share the pain across the departments. People understand they're asking me to squeeze my OpEx by whatever percent, and they're all talking about ways to do it. And if you've got the right environment where it is collaborative, when people are sharing ideas with each other, and then as you go, version 10, 12, 13, whatever version of the budget you're on, that you document these changes and have this narrative to understand how we got where we are, and be sure and circulate those key decisions and agreements after each sessions. And I think now with modern software, you can have like a shared dashboard where you can track all this progress and highlight these interdependencies. Whereas before it was, emailing around, spreadsheets that were renamed and changed and all that. It's just, I don't know, somehow this conversation is making me harken back a lot to the spreadsheet days, and I'm having a little bit of PTSD around it.
I feel for you. So yeah, I still remember those days. Obviously, we are using advanced software in our but yeah, I remember those days. So Glenn, a question I have is that in the conversation we've had in the lead up to this session, you've spoken a lot about the importance of defining who your budget audience is, which I found very interesting. So tell us a bit about that, and what finance teams need to consider in each audience.
Yeah. So, you don't want to have multiple versions of the budget that you're trying to manage to, but I think that there are different ways that you treat the budget and the ways you present the budget. So I think, for your internal audience, for the department heads, so maybe they have, this is our, it's just like MBOs. It's this is our goal, and this is our stretch goal. And so for the internal budget, you kind of focus on operational details, departmental KPIs, because on the internal side, the audience there is, these are people who can make a difference here. So when you make the budget there, be sure that they understand what those levers are, what they can change, and the things that they're going to be evaluated on, that their departments are going to be evaluated on, because that'll all roll up and impact the success of the company. So they're sort of the internal audience, and we know that that's driving KPIs. And then maybe it's a bank would be your, any sort of debt facility would be your other audience. And with banks, you're always, you emphasize your cash flow projections and what you're debt covenant compliance are. And I always, I love to kind of sandbag when I give to the banks because I want to be sure and beat it. And if I know, okay, this is what we have to do for our covenant compliance, my budget that the bank gets is going to be just a hair over that so that we look like rock stars when we go and we beat that. And so that's really the only area where I like to sandbag in budgeting is because it's I've found great success because the bank thinks you're one of their best clients because you're beating your budget every time. But maybe you would hold your internal uh, management team to a higher standard. But for investors, you can't really do that because the investors are, I'm thinking equity investors here. They're saying, I've put money into this company. I want this result. And if you give them kind of a sandbag budget where you're showing like a 3% growth per year, they're like, I could invest in the S&P 500 and have way better returns than this. So you need to be more aggressive with what you present to the investors. But also you don't want to, you want to be realistic in what you give them, because if you start missing, then even if you budgeted, or maybe you hit 12% growth, but you budgeted 15, and they're still going to say, well, you didn't hit your target, even though you might have had a good year at 12% growth. And then, so internal banks, your debt facility providers, your investors, and then the other would be the board. And I think the board needs to understand the board budget is probably very similar to what you do with the internal. It is, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're doing it. And so probably a lot of alignment there. You want to just show that high level. Of course, you're not going to give the level of detail to the board that you do internally, but you want to show them that you are confident in this budget. This is how you're going to get there. And here's the details that you need.
I love it. Yeah. Sandbagging for once, realistic for others. That's very interesting. Fine-tuning budgets according to audience. Well, we for instance have a Kumar SaaS business, right? So obviously a revenue forecasting and budgeting. So the revenue modeling part of things is a big part for us, right? It's huge. I think that applies to the other business, to be honest. But look, for SaaS, it is standard. We are also busy back, so we need to grow very fast and all those things, right? Very classic, probably for our audience as well. So how can finance teams who are less familiar with revenue modeling, revenue planning, and integrating that with technology start to build this more into their processes, right? So moving from, this is my revenue forecast to more, this is my drivers forecast, getting closer to the business. How do you think of that?
Yeah, for me, SaaS forecasting it's my favorite kind of data science forecasting model to use, because I think, it's all the data you have on your customers. I think that being able to take this data and segment your customers, do clusters with your customers, and then predict by the cluster, and doing cohort analysis and looking at customer behavior patterns. And really, it's not just a sale. It's the more granular the information you have on your customer base and on what your pipeline is and what your growth is. I think it makes it, if you have all the right data, that using trend and regression analysis for this is your baseline projections where you start. And then, you take that pipeline data and you use that for short-term forecasting accuracy. I think it'd be hard to say, depending on what your sales cycle is, but pipeline might be good for this next quarter, but I don't know how good our pipeline is going to be for forecasting what's 6 months out or beyond. But then I think looking at things like your customer acquisition cost, your customer lifetime value, having these models that inform your strategies. It's really, the data that you have to support your budgeting, the data that about your existing customers can really be turned into gold. It's the fuel that will drive your models and your forecasting. And I have this debate with finance people all the time that, we're experts in finance. I'm not saying we have to become machine learning engineers or data scientists, but we need to understand the power of analytics and data so that we can make our forecasts stronger with all this. So I do think that, just running out a regression line in Excel is not going to be the best way to forecast. And it really is, we want to get as granular as possible here. We want to capitalize on the data that we have about our customers and be able to turn that into more accurate forecasts.
Yeah, that's a great insight. That's a great insight. I like how you think of it as almost a data analyst, data analysis project or process, right? It's good. And that is a good segue into, getting back into using data to a scenario planning, right? To frame again a scenario planning. And I think as we think of second half of the year reforecasting, or actually the upcoming budgeting season, we realize that, there is still a lot of uncertainty, right? A lot of uncertainty. We have macro factors, industry trends, such as, from elections to interest rates to many, many things, right? Impacting the market and business, I guess, on more philosophical terms, business, just like life, is uncertain. And we need to live with that, try to plan for it. So there is so much, that can change between now and 2025. And we are, of course, a huge fan of a scenario analysis and making it easy for our customers. But also we highly recommend to go deep into it to get ahead of potential risks. So where does it fit into your approach to budgeting? What are some of these best practices that you can share about, a scenario planning to get a better budgeting in place?
Yeah, I mean, and I really you can tell from me talking, I love building models, and it's much easier for me to deal with building models and playing around with those than it is working with the actual people in the real world, because you can really go nuts in that. But I think as a base, I mean, as a minimum step, you have to create a base, a bear, and a bull scenario, just so you can see kind of a range. Now you could make all sorts of subvariants of this and try to go too far down it, but at some point you have to get your head out of the models and into the real world. So usually a base, a bear, and a bull will be enough. But when you create those, you're not just changing a driver of, oh well, what if our revenue goes down? It's more of what are the external factors that could make, or internal factors? What are the factors that could make our revenue go down? What is the competitive landscape? What are the actual drivers and variables for each scenario? Because if you just say, well, this is 100% budget, this is 80% budget, this is 60% budget, and you just apply those percentages down the board, that's not helpful. I mean, you can do that math in your head, and it doesn't really. It's more looking at, yeah, okay, if we hit 60% of our budget, this is where we are, but it's not helpful because it's not saying, well, what are the things that would make us only hit 60% of our budget? So I think really understanding and not just doing variations of the same budget, but changing those drivers around and saying, okay, what if we have to increase our inventory levels because there's a supply chain issue, so we're going to have to ensure that we can deliver it. So something like that, rather than just reducing or adding 12% to your inventory costs. It's like, it's just the why. It's someone told me years ago that as an FP&A person, you have to think of yourself as a kind of an investigative reporter. You're always asking why, trying to find the real reasons for it. And that comes through in both when you're looking at sort of your monthly reports, whether it's your variance reports or whatever it is, and to the time when you're making your budgets, because that why is going to get down to what is the driver, what is the lever, what is the number we need to look at here. So I think keep that in mind rather than just changing on a percentage basis what the number is. And I don't know, the last thing there, and I don't know how many people are doing this, or if it's just something I do. I love doing Monte Carlo simulations. I think just because it's fun to run 10,000 times out and see what happens and pick it. Truthfully, how much value do you get from that? I don't know, but it's fun to see that, sort of the most common result after we've built these scenarios, and it's fun to play around with that kind of stuff. So.
Hey, we need to make our jobs fun and it's just cool to do it, and I love it as well. And hey, sometimes it has more business impacts, sometimes less, but it's in any case a good practice. Well, I think we have 1 minute left, a couple of minutes left, so time flies. But I would love to wrap up with one last question. And of course, hey, winter is coming. The budgeting season, those long nights, those weekends is around the corner. And we know that. But probably we still have some time for a summer project and sharpen our swords and be more ready for that budgeting season. So to finish off, what's the number one thing that finance teams can do between now and September, October to make sure they nail budget season this year?
Yeah, this is, I always think about the longer you are at a business, how much easier the budgeting cycle becomes. Whereas if you're moving around a lot and you have to feel like you're reinventing the wheel at a new business, it's tough every year. But hopefully last year, when you finally wrapped the annual budgeting season, you and your team did a postmortem of what worked and what didn't, and then you kind of pull that out, dust brush the digital dust off of it, and do a comprehensive review. Remember what worked and what didn't, and use those learnings. But ideally, that's kind of something that's been driving what you've done up to this point. But if you haven't, now is a good time to remember, oh, I have to be sure and get these out to the department heads by this time, or I have to be sure and get the inputs here so that we have time to roll everything up. I would love to say, if you don't have the latest and greatest software or a new system in place, let's go ahead and dive in and get that. But I worry, depending on what you're doing, if you're getting down to crunch time of when you do the budget, maybe now is not the time to try to implement a full new, obviously not ERP, but you know what I mean, like some kind of different software. So, but I do think, planning for it and then sort of timing when you put the new software in around the budget season, because if you're trying to change a process and put a new system in, it's a lot for people to do right now. So, but I think, sort of thinking about how to incorporate that software into your budgeting. And I think now's the time to look at that calendar, looking back at what you did last year. What are the roles and responsibilities and what are the deadlines we have to meet, and starting to get that ready. And and then standardized templates and guidelines, have all those in place, and refine based on what worked and what didn't last year. And I think I went over time, but that's about the quickest way I could do it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, there was a lot of nuggets of wisdom and tips and actionable stuff that you share with me. I'm very grateful, and also with the audience. It's been awesome. What a blast to have you here. What a blast to get ready for the upcoming budgeting season. It's a tough time for finance teams. It's crunch time. So anything we can do to get ready for that and upgrade our game from previous years, the more impact we will have going forward. And again, I always say that it's not only the budgeting season itself, but it's actually what you do with that budget going forward into the following year. So it's the continuity, having that flexibility and those scenarios built in, and making your best to then having that current through reforecasting. So it's building that motion where then you become this strategic partner to the business. Look, we're going to leave it here. Elaine, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Hopefully we can have you again very soon with us, and looking forward to that session again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julio. Really enjoyed that.
Talk soon. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining.